Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you, Harlan. So, of course, we are discussing Noah, and we're talking at this point about how God has told him to go onto the ark. And I believe we're still there in the commandments to Noah as God is talking to Noah and telling him what to do in terms of bringing the animals onto the ark. So here we go. Let's take a look. We're at chapter 7. Vayomer Hashem leNoach bo ata v'chol beitcha el hateva. So the Lord said to Noach, or Hashem said to Noach, come you and all your household into the teva, into the ark, ki otcha ra'iti tzaddik, because you I saw as tzaddik lefanai, righteous before me, bador hazeh, in this generation. Going on, Mikol Habehemah Torah, and now there's, before we had read about pairs, but now we read about this concept of pure beasts, right? From every pure beast, Tikach Lecha Shiva Shiva, you shall take 7 apiece, Ish ve'ishto, a man and his wife, male and female, in other words, Umin Habehemah, She'ena, Asher lo tahora, which is not pure. He, which is not pure, Shnayim ish ve'ishto, 2, man and his wife, right? Couples. So we have some interesting comments here. So this ish v'ishto, a man and his wife, and in Sanhedrin, right, page 108b, they question ishut, marriage, matrimony, labhema, for cattle, mi itla, do animals have this concept of matrimony? And we're lucky that actually that the Torah Temimah explains what the point is of this, okay? Amar Rabbi Abahu, said Rabbi Abahu, Amar Kra, the scripture states, Vahaba'in, and those that come, right? They come themselves. Me'otan sheba'u me'elahem. In other words, from those that came by themselves. In other words, Noah did not go get them. And this idea of the animals coming willingly and on their own to the ark, that Noah and his family did not have to go and collect them, but that they came willingly. And in a way, I have this picture, and perhaps you do too, these pictures of Noah and the ark and the animals lining up to come into the ark. So in fact, that's reflective of this concept that we have, that the animals came of themselves. Now let's look at this. Kavanat hakushia. So this question, right? The purpose of this question, ishut lebehema mi itla, is this concept of matrimony apply to cattle or animals right here? So he says mishum, and the reason is mishum de nikeva nikeva achat niskeket lechama zacharim. And that what he's saying here is that in general, one female may in fact be coupled with more than one male. And so this idea of marriage, when you think of the very term marriage as meaning connecting and joined into one, right, is the idea of one woman uh, to a man, right? And it's true, they did believe in polygamy, but the idea of the woman alone. And I think, obviously this is a big subject. One perhaps more obvious statement is to be clear as to children, that the whole idea of this is procreation. The idea that the paternity of those children not be in question, right? That be an issue, and that may be actually a much deeper subject that might appear on the surface, right? And I think that is probably a very important issue. Um, and again, I was thinking in terms of the relationship of the father to the child, right? And also, of course, at that time, we were talking about the women being much more dependent because of circumstances on being provided for by the man. That is not so clear anymore in our society, but at least back then it would have been clear. And of course, there are many, many parts of the world, I perhaps even most parts of the world, where this is still the case, where the man has to be the provider, and the woman is essentially her role is bringing the children in and raising the children and nurturing the children, etc. So just this idea of matrimony. Right. So the idea is that the female is only coupled with one male. That's the matrimony that he's referring to, right? Umimela, right? And honestly, because the fact is that in the wild, very often a female is coupled with more than one male. With animals, it's not the same kind of issue, right? Umimela, and so automatically lo yashayach baho chaye ishut. And for this reason, this does not apply. Matrimony doesn't apply to wild animals, to animals. Umashni Rabbi Abahu, right? And Rabbi Abahu is teaching me'otan sheba'u me'alehen el hateva. In other words, referring to the animals that came automatically into the ark. V'yadan Noach. And so Noah would know because remember they were supposed to come in couples, right? And that was, of course, the idea of ish ve'ishto, right? That they came in pairs. V'yadan Noach, and Noah knew, understood, she'elu chayim chaye ish ve'ishto, that these particular animals were living the life of a man and his wife. V'hainu, and that is to say, she'enan mizdavgim lezulatam, that they do not couple with anyone else, anyone besides themselves. And of course, in this case, one male to one female. V'lachein ba'u zogot zogot. And for this reason, they were coming by pairs and pairs, each one in pairs. V'haita ze behashgachat Hashem, and this was under the providence of God. This was through God's providence. Shiba'u rak elu, that only these ones actually came. V'nir'eh, and it appears, shechasar kan b'divrei Rabbi I think this is what's up. B'divrei Rabbi Abahu. And it appears that here in the words of Rabbi Abahu, we're talking about right over here, and he's going to refer to the fact that he is referring to these words which are in bracket as to why he's bracketed them. That is to say, the Torah Temimah is the one that cites those words, that quotes Rabbi Abahu that way, right? Hamilot Amar Kra Vahabaim. In other words, these words, Amar Kra Vahabaim, those words said scripture, right? Those that come, right? Shekain Besamuch Pasuk Chet, because he says later on in verse 8, Darish Gamken Meotan Sheba'um Alehem. Again, there is an interpretation, there's a drush on those words, Me'otan Sheba'um Alehen. Right, so here
So,
we are. In other words, right there. Question? Yes, David.
yeah.
Hi.
Hi. So, does that mean that species that were practicing polygamy were destroyed or left out? Because if they didn't come as a couple, does that mean they were gone?
Good question. I did not take it that way. Now, remember here he says that it's a reference to the seven pure animals, right? The clean animals. And we're going to have another clarification of this whole concept of now introducing this notion of pure animals and animals that are not pure. Our next drush is going to discuss that. Now, the point that the point that Torah Temimah is making is that basically you don't use one series of words to drush out two different kinds of interpretations. And so he's saying that later on, right, that he is going to use exact the words that that the me'otan shaba'u me'alehem. He's going to use those three words, right? To and they're not the words in the scriptures. He's using that that concept. So the question is, what is the basis of his drush? And what Torah Temimah is saying is that Scripture says vahabaim, those that come. He's using this term vahabaim, right? And later on he says, right? Uh, so he says this is the word he uses, and in verse 50, verse 16, he uses that word vahabaim, right? This word habaim, to mean that they came of themselves. So the fact, so I'm having to sort of reverse a little bit what I said before when I said you don't use a verse to drush two things. That's not the point here. I have to go back on that. The point here is that what Torah Temimah is noting is that Rabbi Abahu uses this word vahabaim to mean me'otan sheba'u me'alehen. So in Sanhedrin, the text there reads, Amar Rabbi Abahu me'otan sheba'u me'alehem, where he simply says, well, they're only those who came of themselves. In other words, those who came of themselves. And what Torah Temimah is pointing out is that Rabbi Abahu is actually using a scriptural verse that is, or a word in scripture, vahabaim, right? That there's this word vahabaim, and that's how we know that we're talking about those that came in and of themselves, because it says those who came. They came. He didn't have to go get them. They came by themselves, right? So he says umas michsham, and there he connects there the lashon v'habaim, that he uses that term v'habaim, those that came, the pasuk tet zayin in verse 16. Shekain mashmale, because he to him that lashon zeh, that is to say, this expression of v'habaim implies to him, right, or applies shayu shabam elhim. The fact is that they were coming of themselves. He didn't have to go get them. Ye'uyan sham. V'lachen hosafnu b'muskar kan. And for that reason, we have added in the brackets here, amar kra v'habaim. Those words, amar kra v'habaim. Uva Gemara kan, and here in the Gemara, in this passage that he's citing from the Gemara, ita od terutzim. If you go to this Gemara here, you find other explanations, la kushiazo, to this particular difficulty or this particular question about why does it talk about ish v'ishto? Why does it talk about man and wife as if animals have matrimony? And there are other, he's saying here in the Gemara, there are other explanations of the usage of this phraseology. Okay, of the question, ishut labahima v'chule. Since when do animals have this concept of matrimony? Ve'etaknu drasha Rabbi Abahu, and we copy down from those passages the explanation of Rabbi Abahu, Shehu Batra. Why? Because his is the final explanation. I think what he's saying is that if you go to the Gemara, you'll find various explanations. There may be difficulties associated with those explanations, but Rabbi Abahu is the last explanation given in those passages. V'gam hu masmich al lashon pasuk. And not only that, in those other passages, they simply are explanations. But Rabbi Abahu is dependent on actually a term in the pasuk itself, which he can use as a basis for his understanding that it refers to the fact that the animals came of themselves. Now, we're going to go on, and in fact, this idea that the animals came of themselves, right, is an interesting one because Noah is told not to take certain animals. We're going to see, right, how in terms of the interpretations given. So we'll see, right? So
So
yeah, go
so
ahead, please. Yep, go
it's
ahead.
it's it's separate concepts, right? There's one concept here about the animals coming of themselves, and then that which leads into the other another concept around the idea of matrimony, which leads to the possibility of exclusion, but not necessarily. So is that am I getting it somewhere?
I think you do. I think you have the basis idea,
Okay,
right?
all
So the
right.
fact, here's the point. The animals came in couples. And because they came in couples, right? And this may be your point as well. I'm just trying to, play it out a little bit, right? Tease it out a little bit. The fact here's what Rabbi Abahu is saying, is that it uses this word habaim. This word habaim means the animals came, right? And if they came, it
Yeah.
meant he didn't have to go and search for them, right? So these animals that came, when Noah saw these animals coming in couples, right? That implied that what we understand by matrimony, which means one man and one woman, right? That especially the fact, especially because there was that time society was polygamous, right? That there's only one woman to a man, right? I'm saying this wrong. That a woman wouldn't have more than one man with whom she would mate at any given time. You
Yep.
understand? That she'd have two husbands at one time. That's the point.
Right. Right. And okay. And of course Noah was not polygamous either. So
No,
so
he wasn't actually. It's true. Good observation. I didn't think about that, but I appreciate your mentioning that. Yeah, he wasn't, interestingly enough.
what, yeah, right. So that's what I meant by it. It sounded like, almost, because it doesn't say they came, as multiple, members of their species, which could have
No,
that
right.
that it was, three or, one to two, whatever, but we won't. Okay.
A
So
pair or seven pairs, I think is
right.
what we're saying,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
So okay.
Or six pair or three pairs at plus one. I don't
Right.
know, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's helping. Okay, let's move on. Okay.
Okay, no problem. No, David, this is a little complex, and I think it's good that we don't just rush into the next comment. Okay, I really appreciate, in case anyone else ever bothers to look at these recordings, that it's helpful to them. And I
Yeah,
hope it is.
and
I
I,
hope it
I
is.
I guess the point is also that if you think about it, that reinforces the idea of marriage, throughout our society, and not necessarily, polygamy for different reasons, right? I
Right.
mean, but basically it puts the basis right there, at the ark itself, right? I mean,
Yes.
that's what, if assuming that interpretation. Anyway, that's what I was okay. Move
All
on.
right. Good. No, no problem. No problem. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so let's take a look at what this says, right? So it goes on. We got a few verses just to cover without any further Torah Temimahs, right? So Gam me'of hashamayim shiva shiva zachar nekeva. Also from the birds of the heavens, seven pair or seven, male and female. So it sounds like seven pairs, male and female. Lachayot zera al pnei kol haaretz. In other words, to sustain seed over the entire surface of the earth. Ki le'amim ud, for in days Shiva, for in 7 days, Anochi mamtir al haaretz, I am going to rain on, cause rain to fall on the earth, arba'im yom, for 40 days, for arba'im laila, and 40 nights. Umachiti et kol hayakum, and I will blot out the entire existence, asher asiti, which I made. Look at that. Look at that sort of phrase there. There's a certain sadness that I think you see that God is having to destroy what He had created, my alpnei hadama, from the surface of the earth, right? Vayas Noach kachol asher tzivahu Hashem, and Noah did everything that God told him. Let's make sure. I want to find out the place. Okay, going on. We're going to verse 8 is where we're going. Okay. So we finished what God spoke to him, right? And now we're going on to Noah performing it. V'Noach ben shesh ma'ot shana. Noah was 600 years. V'hamabul haya mayim ha'aretz, and the mabul was water on the earth. We discussed this term mabul, right? It has to do with the destruction, right? That perhaps the word destruction is a better word than rather flood, right? Because it says, and the destruction then was water over the earth. right? Vayavo Noach uvanav, and Noah and his sons came, ve'ishto uneshevanav, and his wife and his sons' wives, ito, with him, elateva, into the ark, mipnei mabul, on account of the waters of the Mabul. I almost don't want to translate it, but having given you an interpretation of this word. And now going on, it's saying, he did it. Min habehema Torah, from the pure animals, or min habehema asher einena Torah, and from the animals which were not pure. In other words, he took from both kinds, right? Umin ha'of, and from the birds, v'chol asher romes al ha'adamah, and all that swarms on the earth, right? So going on. Let's take a look. Got some lovely, lovely Torah Temimahs here. So first of all, a really good question, right? Uh, sorry, I got this one. Verse 3, I did not do this. Lachayot zera, right? To keep seed alive. And what do we mean, right? Interesting. The reason this is being mentioned, I mean, come on, we all know, why is he bringing them into the ark? Why does the Torah have to mention to keep seed alive? It's pretty obvious, but why to keep seed alive? Why that expression if it just means, to keep animals alive? And they say, lemute, to exclude zaken vesaris. That was to exclude old animals. Saris would mean basically castrated animals. There's a good Torah Temimah on this, right? She'ein yoldin, because they do not procreate, right? They're too old or they're castrated. For or probably neutered, let's say neutered. For afalpi, and despite the fact the vesof parsha hakodemet, that at the end of the previous chapter, kvar ma'atinan milashon lachayot, we already excluded, right? But through that passage of lachayot itcha, right? We had this, right? To keep alive with you. We discussed what do it mean to keep alive with you that's mentioned in that previous chapter. Shelo yavi treifa. We said at that time that he should not bring a treif animal in it. Remember, we had talked about that, right? V'kaimalan, and we have an accepted idea, right? Accepted rule. The treifa eina yoledet, that a treifa is not capable of procreation. For imkain, and if that's the case, in other words, if we already know that a treifa isn't capable of procreation, the imkain anu yodin, we already know shelo yavi zo she'ena yoledet, that the idea of him not bringing one animals that weren't capable of procreation, he's already being told that when he was told to live with you, that would mean no treif animal, no animal that's been mutilated, to that degree. So why do we need an additional statement, right? Why do we need this statement, lachayot kol zera? We already know that, right? Ach yesh lomar, but one could say, de'i me'itcha, from this word me'itcha, with you. In other words, the idea being that they had to live with like him, right? In other words, just as Noah was not trefa, so the animals should not be trefa, right? That if it was just from this me'itcha, with you, hava amina, I would infer demiut treifa, that when it says no treifa animals, eino mishum de'ena yoledet, it's not necessarily that the reason why Noah wasn't allowed to bring a treifa into the ark, right, wasn't because it wasn't capable of procreation, ella, but rather mishum de'ena chaya yud bet cheresh. But we also know, and at the time we discussed this, that a treifa animal isn't capable of surviving 12 months. That's the reason that he was told not to bring, that it had to be chaya me'it, with you, right? That it had to do with the fact that it would survive for 12 months, even though we have a notion, right? Or at least I would say a rule, however you want to say it, right? Isn't capable of living, capable of procreation. But there, the treifa also, the first thing is that it's not going to survive 12 months. And the fact is, shi'ur zman hamabul, which is exactly how long the flood lasted. Ve'efshar shetamut bateva. And if that's the case, this treifa animal might well die in the ark. Lashon itcha, and this lashon, this term itcha, with you, mashma, and it simply implies shetiye ito betzavta, savta. That all it meant was that the animals should accompany him. In other words, they should keep him company for the entire 12 months, right? Uh, Tzavta chada, in one, keep him company. V'hainu zish. Sorry,
Question?
go ahead, David, please. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry if you saw my hand or not.
No, it's
Okay,
okay.
so this brings up a question then, and then I know we're probably using the word trefa in a different sense, but my question is, how come with that in that given that opportunity, why did God put animals onto the ark that eventually we would not be able to eat? So in other words, why wouldn't God have just placed the animals on there that were kashrut and basically not the rest of them? What
Okay,
was why? Because it seems to
right.
me that would have made life a lot easier, right? And the rest of the world would have followed suit on that as well. So why because already you've said the impure animal. Yeah. Anyway, that's my question.
Okay. So here we can start off this way. Good. Okay, great question. So basically, when we talk about pure animals, we are talking about animals that one is able to, first of all, for the most part, impure refers to the fact that they can be offered as sacrifices. Right.
Right.
However, we also know that deer, right, any ungulate, it can also is also considered pure for the purposes of human consumption. Okay? So those also would be included as pure animals. Even though deer cannot be placed on the altar, they are not considered appropriate for sacrifice.
Okay.
Okay. Now look, there are also animals that we are not allowed to eat, but are very useful. Horses aren't kosher, camels aren't kosher, okay? Donkeys aren't kosher, but we use them. They're very, and certainly not so much anymore, perhaps, but certainly for a long, 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 long time, they were very important animals in terms of farming and for human survival. Now, let's go further. So what about wild animals, right? Cattle meaning, not just sheep and cows, or sheep and bulls, but also animals that are not domesticated. By the way,
Well,
I think of a
yeah.
lot of people, dogs are not kosher. I think there are a lot of people, at least in Sonoma County, would be very upset if they couldn't keep if they weren't dogs around.
Right. But I'm thinking even like, fish, I mean, we I mean, I'm not sure you'd find shellfish as useful or not.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, you get my point. So,
I do. And I want to finish up the trying to answer your question.
oh, sorry.
Okay. No, 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 it's not a problem. Um, I think I don't know necessarily that there was a sense of uh, of ecology, right? That whole notion of ecological balance, but perhaps there was. That there was, I mean, regardless, there would be a sense that whether or not we understand every single thing that God purposes in the world, that these animals have an important purpose. Okay. There's some lovely stories about why God created flies or why God created spiders and things. And there are sweet little stories in the tradition that explain situations where such were very important, that where even human beings' lives were saved by these particular animals. Okay. So whether or not we understand the purpose, I mean, my sense is that there is, maybe my sense of balance of nature is a much more modern concept, and maybe it isn't such a modern concept. That on a certain level, as legitimate as your question is, and it's a great question, that what it leads us to is saying is that there are elements of the beauty and balance of this world that perhaps we can't explain 100%. And maybe we can explain it better these days, right? I mean, there are many impure animals that perform vital functions in this world, such as bees. Now, it's interesting because bees are not kosher insects. No insect is kosher except for this certain species of grasshopper. And yet, the honey that the bees create is permissible, right? It is kosher because it's not part of the animal. It's not part of bees, right? It's essentially, forgive me, it's what they uh, vomit up, okay? Right. But anyway, it's something they process and it's kosher. But I that's at this point, it's the best way I can answer your question.
Interesting. No, I get it, and it makes sense. It's just, yeah, it's an interesting distinction
Yes,
around, making something, because of the opportunity. I mean, because essentially God was recreating the world, right? By the flood,
correct,
was
correct,
essentially recreating the world. So
right.
if God had wanted to, God could have created the world such that everything was totally usable in all senses, right? Eating, functional, whatever.
Yeah,
But we've chosen that distinction between that which is functional and we're able to consume versus that which is functional and we're not able to consume, right?
right.
And so there's and maybe that also has to do with making choices and willpower and adhering to things and all those other aspects that you can associate with yeah, so with trying to keep kosher versus not, right? So but anyway, okay. I thanks for the explanation, that really helps.
No, no problem. It's a kind of cool discussion. As we go on with this, though, I would say that the prime issue here is the ability to offer these animals up as offerings.
Yes.
Thanksgiving. And I think that in itself might be a very profound thought because my life has taught me that appreciation is the most important value you can have as a human being. And offering these offerings is actually a profound statement of gratitude, but also the privilege of being able to express gratitude in this particular way. That God is thinking ahead and saying, I know you're going to need to do this. And so I want to make sure you have the means and the ability to do this.
Okay.
I mean, the main thing about this purity and impurity here has to do with offering, bringing offerings. Because we know from the Torah itself that Noah brought an offering. Afterwards, he brought offerings. And I think, in this, it's it's taken me a long time to realize how profound an experience gratitude and appreciation are, and how foundational they are to any kind of joy and happiness. If you don't have appreciation, you will never be happy. I'm willing to go on the line and say that. Anyway, let me finish quickly as I can the rest of this Torah Temimah, right? Right. Uh, so we were explaining the fact that there seems to be a duplication, and it isn't really a duplication, that if we only had the first case where it means they can't be treif, and we know that a treif animal cannot reproduce, that might not be our understanding, though. That the whole point was that they needed to be able to survive the 12 months. Aval zaken v'saris, but when it comes to an older animal or an animal that's been neutered, kevan shechayim Haim, right? They survive, right? They're alive. There's no saying that an older animal is not going to make it past 12 months, right? And certainly not necessarily a neutered animal, right? Yikach oto. Yikach ito, that in fact, he should take them with him. V'af al pi she'ein yoldim, despite the fact that they aren't able to procreate. Kamash malan, and for this reason, we have these words now, lachayot zera, that it says specifically in order to procreate. ומכיוון דאינם בכלל לחיות זרע, and because such animals, animals that are aged or neutered, cannot be included in the group, in the set of animals that are capable of procreation, harehem ketrefa. For that reason, they're like a trefa, v'lo yikach otam, and he shouldn't take them. V'yein od betosafot besugya, and he's saying a further reference to Tosafot. That's, if you go to the Talmud itself and the Tosafot on the side of the page regarding this of this particular reference he's made, right? Avodah Zarah, the tractate Avodah Zarah, page 6a, you'll find more to be said on this subject. And we'll need to stop here for today. So I'll make a quick mark and we'll know where we need to go for next time. And this, by the way, is this next one is one of my favorite drashas. So we'll see. Has great practical significance, actually. So I'm going to stop the share. And thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording.